Is Alfred Adask, and he is the host of a radio program that is broadcast through the internet and internationally, and also on shortwave radio, WWCR shortwave radio. And he is preparing to enter into a contract, into a relationship with a new facility that has 50,000 watts. And so he is broadcasting internationally as well. Alfred is the author, was the producer or editor of a magazine called Anti-Shyster, and he made that a magazine available for many, many years. He ran for the Supreme Court in Texas, place 1, and he got over 200,000 votes when he ran. So he is a specialist in the Constitution. He reads it, he talks about it, he breathes it. And he has a perspective that I think that we need to hear and understand. He's been a political activist for over 20 years. I've had the pleasure of being on his radio program, being interviewed by him, and he is here today. So, Alfred, would you come and lead us in some necessary information?
Hi, folks. This is the first time I have tried to make a PowerPoint presentation, and there we go. This is going to be a little awkward. Rudy has to coordinate with me. I have to look here. Otherwise, if I look here like this, I'm going to be looking back and forth at you people, and it may get to that before we're done. I don't want to be turning my back on the audience, in part because it's impolite, and in part because sometimes it's dangerous. All right, you don't necessarily, depends on how they receive whatever it is you're trying to talk about. We start out with man or other animals. That's the name of this presentation, and what it's ultimately about is spiritual warfare. It's evidence of spiritual warfare that's taking place in this country right now. And the average person that hears you, oh yeah, you're engaged in spiritual warfare, the average person is going to think that's nonsense. We're not engaged in spiritual warfare. That's just some. No, I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to show you law. Law. Not my words, law. Where the government is engaged in spiritual warfare against the people of the United States of America. It's not, the ideas I'll try to explain to you today, they're not necessarily easy to absorb. I understand that these are challenging. You'll have to make an effort to follow what I'm saying. I try to make it as simple as I possibly can, but this involves history. It involves fundamental documents, the Declaration of Independence more so than anything else. It involves the spiritual foundation on which this country was built. You need to understand some history. You need to understand some Bible. You need to understand some grammar. I'm even going to make you folks learn a little bit of grammar today. And some of you are saying, oh my God, what a beast. The man is going to try to make us learn grammar. I think the biggest lesson out of all of this is that you must learn to read, and you must learn to write, and you must learn to speak. We are facing problems with this government. We're facing problems in the society. And we are easily deceived by the idea that it's all about police officers, for example, with guns or clubs or tasers or whatever, that are going to put you down and hold you in place. And we see evidence of the police state growing around us on a regular basis. But you're not being trapped, you're not being ensnared by guns and clubs. You're being ensnared by words. And if you are fluent in the language, if you make it your business to learn how to speak, read, and write, you can deal with the system. And part of the reason I say that is because I've been sued by the Attorney General of the state of Texas for $25,000 per day. That's $9 million per year. You understand that? I'd like to see a show of hands. Everybody else who's been sued by an Attorney General of any state for $9 million a year, raise your hand. I was on the hook for potentially $20 million in this situation. And I defeated them by, first, grace of God, and second, being able to read. And I read, and this involved drug laws. You know, I think I'm going to let this go. I'm going to turn this loose, and we're going to just run this au naturel. I'll ask you, Rudy, I'll ask you to move this once in a while. I'll do this without benefit of this. It disturbs me. The Attorney General of the state of Texas, initially, this started out with a lawsuit in 2001 against a husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. William Fresnel, and their corporation. And they were sued for the manufacture and distribution of a controlled substance. All right? This is a civil suit by the Attorney General of the state of Texas. It was initiated by the FDA in Washington, D.C. And it was odd. We discovered before this was done, I wound up being the last defendant. I was added in 2006. By the time I was added, there were 6 previous defendants, Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel and their corporation, then a man named Ben Taylor, his corporation and his trust, and finally I was added because I was fiduciary for his trust. They made me a defendant. And I volunteered to be fiduciary so I'd have opportunity to speak in the court case. And I didn't expect they'd make me a defendant, all right? I thought, now I'm a fiduciary, I can speak in the courtroom. But they said, no, welcome to our world, now you're a defendant, you're on the hook for 25 grand a day. Well, it focuses your attention. You get sued for $25,000 a day, you start taking this pretty seriously. Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel took it seriously. They started out in 2001. They hired an attorney to one of the better law firms in Texas to represent them, and the law firm charged them ultimately about $160,000 in fees. The $160,000 drove Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel into bankruptcy. The bankruptcy drove them into divorce, and eventually they left Texas for parts unknown. Before they left, they sold some of their equipment and some of their stock. They didn't sell their business, but they did sell some of their equipment and some of their stock to Mr. Taylor, and he used it to start making colloidal silver. This was the controlled substance that Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel were selling. It was colloidal silver, which is just distilled water that has silver ions in it, and it's an effective and inexpensive antibiotic. But the government came after them under, again, manufacture and distribution of a controlled substance. This is the same law that they use for going after people that are manufacturing methamphetamine, or they're involved in cocaine or heroin or whatever. Although this was a civil case, it wasn't criminal. Nevertheless, it relies on the same fundamental definitions and principles. And as we got into the case, you might be able to find this, Rudy. If you scroll down, you're going to see something. It'll be down in under fundamentals, and it'll be, I believe, you'll see the key to the case. And if you put that up on the screen, nope, down further. We'll get back to this probably. Go ahead. Not that further. We're looking for a law. We're looking for a law from the Texas. Go to personal experience, matter of fact. Go to personal experience. Oh, no, keep going. There you go. A little further. Like I say this, all right, here we go. Here, this is what I'm looking for. They tell us this is text from the paperwork from the Attorney General, all right, that was used, and they initially filed against Mr. and Mrs. Fresnel. And later on, Mr. Taylor got involved, and he asked me if I could assist, and I volunteered to be fiduciary for his trust. And they said, okay, fine, now you're a defendant. And they told us in the paperwork, the key to this case is the Texas definition of drugs. This is a quote from the Attorney General's paperwork. He says, the key to this case lies in determining whether the defendant's colloidal silver products met the definition of a drug. And then they quote Texas Health and Safety Code, section 431.002, subsection 14, which provides in pertinent part, drug means articles designed or intended in the use, diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, prevention of diseases in man or other animals. Articles other than food intended to affect the structure of any function of the body of man or other animals. Well, I looked at that and I said, why, these damn fools, and I know you shouldn't be saying that, but that was my first reaction. I said, they don't know what they're talking about. The phrase man or other animals, they're not saying man or animals. If they said man or animals, that makes perfect sense. We've got man over here, we've got animals over here. Or means we have two different classifications. We could say trees or animals. We could say rocks or animals. We could say man or animals. But when we say man or other animals, this is like saying a horse or other animals. It makes perfect sense. The horse is a specific example of the group, the generic classification of animals. All right? So when they say man or other animals, they're saying man is an animal. And the first time I saw that, I thought, why, these people are crazy. Rudy, give me another slide. Give me the next one. And this is just, the grammar just tells me that man is an animal. Now, the reason this is important, you go to Genesis 1, 26 through 28. It says on the sixth day, God created man in his image and gave man dominion over the animals. Man can't be an animal. Under my faith as a Christian, under the Jewish faith, probably under the Muslim faith. I'm not a student of the Muslim faith, but they're probably operating on the same principle. You can't be an animal and be made in God's image. And if you're not made in God's image, you are not a Christian, you're not a Jew, you're probably not a Muslim. And I thought, well, this is crazy. They can't be doing that. The idiots don't know how to write. They didn't understand what they're writing. What else? And here's the other one. We've got a Declaration of Independence. And Declaration of Independence declares in the second sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the foundation of this country. That second sentence in the Declaration is the single most radical political statement in Western history. There is nothing to rival it, and nothing you've ever heard of or seen in at least 3,000 years. And virtually no one appreciates the significance of that second sentence. The reason it's significant is because historically, the only man that was sovereign in a particular country was the one who got his rights directly from God, the king. He had the divine right of kings. The reason he was king is because he and he alone got his rights directly from God. He went through a coronation ceremony to become king. And in that coronation ceremony, it didn't occur in a secular facility. He wasn't elected. He wasn't appointed. The coronation ceremony took place in a church. It tells you that he became sovereign by virtue of God giving him that right of sovereignty. When this country began, and they said, now, one more point. When they made a man a king in England or France or Spain or whatever, he was king because he got his rights from God. He had the divine right of kings. He went through a coronation ceremony in the church, and one of the things they did is they gave him a crown. That crown is also, the word for crown is also corona. It is intended to emulate the corona you see in the medieval paintings around the heads of the Christ, around the heads of the saints, around the heads of the apostles. That crown they put on the king's head was a physical manifestation of, it was intended to emulate the crown the corona that you saw around the saints. It was evidence. He got his rights directly from God. He was special, and all else were subjects because they did not get their rights directly from God. Now, you go forward, I don't know if, go ahead, take the next one of these. Let me see if I can gather my thoughts here. Because say they're doing this PowerPoint, I can do this stuff, and I don't know if I can't chew gum and walk at the same time as part of my problem. Losing my train of thought. Let's go back to this right here. Second thing in the case, they gave us the federal definition of drugs. And it said it's virtually identical to the Texas definition, and it's found at 21 United States Code annotated, Section 321, subsection G, sub whatever 1, which provides in pertinent part the term drug means articles intended in the use, diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals. And they did it again, man or other animals. And I realized, my God, they're not making a mistake. They're not making a mistake. They see us as animals. Now, here I'm catching up. The ideas sometimes go around like Halley's Comet. They go through, and you lose them for a while, but they come back after a while. The significance of this country, the foundation for American exceptionalism, is that second sentence in the Declaration of Independence, which says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that all are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. With that sentence, they elevated all men to the status of sovereigns. Instead of having a country where we had one sovereign who got his rights from God, and all the rest were subjects who did not get their rights from God, this country started on the premise, no, we all get our rights from God. And therefore, we are each individual sovereigns. This is the foundation for American exceptionalism. This is brought out, this is supported in part in Chisholm versus Georgia, which is a Supreme Court case of 1793. Now, 1793 is 17 years after the Declaration of Independence, 4 years after the Constitution of the United States was ratified. 1793. They knew what they were talking about. This isn't late. This is part of the generation of the revolutionaries that created this country. And in Chisholm versus Georgia, the Supreme Court of the United States declared that we are all sovereigns, plural, without subjects. Right? There were no subjects in this country. We were all sovereigns. I'm a sovereign, you're a sovereign, all the women are sovereign, each of the men are sovereign, we are sovereigns. What does that mean? Rudy, if you can find, rotate backwards, go backwards a little bit. Keep on rolling and see if you can find one of the pyramids. For one of the, here's one of them. Yeah, here is the American law form. Now we're going to look for an earlier one in a moment. This is the American law form. A law form is a hierarchy of authority. The American law form was God number one, people number two as individual sovereigns, and government number three as our public servants. The government serves the sovereigns. It does not serve the subjects. See if you can rotate back and catch the, go back, keep rolling. Keep going. No, more. Here, wait. Here's the English law form. God number one. King of England, number two. He was directly under God. Then you had the government of England. They were served the sovereign, that was the king, the one guy who got his rights from God. And lastly, you had all the multitude of subjects. Everybody was at the bottom of the pecking order because they did not get their rights from God. This country reversed that principle with the second sentence in the Declaration of Independence. Said, no, we all get our rights from God. And when they did that, they moved the subjects from here. They jumped up over the government, and they became co-equal with the King of England. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, including kings, created equal, that they are all, not just kings, all endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Third sentence of the Declaration of Independence says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. All right? And they're telling us that the purpose of government as envisioned by the Founding Fathers was to secure to every man, woman, and even unborn child their God-given unalienable rights as declared in the previous sentence, second sentence. This was the purpose of government as envisioned by the founders. And as long as that's the case, the government is our public servant. Now, this goes to spiritual warfare. Government does not want to serve. Government does not want to be your public servant. Government wants to be your master. And insofar as our God-given unalienable rights, our basis for our individual sovereignty flows from God, the solution to government's problem is to try to strip us of our relationship to God, try to strip us of our memory of what the fundamental principles were in the Declaration of Independence. And if they can do that, they convince us that we are what? Animals. Animals. Because you go back to Genesis 1, 26 through 28, it says, on the sixth day God created man in his image and gave man dominion over the animals. He did not give any of these rights to animals. If you're an animal, you're in big trouble. And I know there's people in this room that have to appreciate that. Because being an animal lays at the foundation of being a slave. This is fundamental. And it's not a new situation. It's a dangerous situation. It's profoundly dangerous. You get into it, it implicates genocide, which may sound bizarre, but I guarantee you, I can show you the law. We have it's here. We may have to scramble through to get to it. When the Hutus, decide to chop up the Tutsis in Central Africa, the first thing they do is they declare the opponent, their adversaries, to be animals. And the reason is, if you're an animal, we can kill you, we can kill your wife, we can kill your kids. We can exterminate you like a hive of wasps or a nest of rats. And even primitive people understand that. It's part of the reason, before they go out and start hacking people up with their machetes, they say, these people are animals. That allows us to do it. It's the same reason we had gooks to fight in Vietnam. It's the same reason we have ragheads to fight over in Afghanistan and Iraq. You've got to dehumanize your adversary, and one of the ways you do this is by calling them animals. Now, this is not just metaphor. This isn't just, it's an interesting analogy or whatever. Before the Nazis could go after the Jews and exterminate them in World War II, first thing they did is pass laws that declared the Jews to be Untermenschen. And what Untermenschen means, Unter means under, and Mensch or Menschen means man. It means an underman, an inferior man. It ultimately means an animal. They passed laws in order to allow them to butcher the Jews. Now, what we showed you here, I read this law that I'm being sued for $25,000 a day on, the definition of drugs. And I saw man or other animals in there, and I said, they're calling us animals. And when I saw it the second time, I realized, my God, it's not an accident. And in fact, we found 23 separate instances in our particular case of Texas and federal law where the people are presumed to be animals. We found it in rules and regulations, and again, we also found it not only the definition of drugs, but also the definition of medical devices. It includes the phrase man or other animals. Well, it was obvious to me that if this is the key to the case, and if I'm a Christian and my Bible says I'm made in God's image, I can't be an animal, then my defense against this lawsuit was a freedom of religion defense. That's what we would do, and we did. We put that together. I drafted a freedom of religion, and this is a good Lord. He helps you see this stuff. And you put this together, and we had been receiving paperwork from the Attorney General of the state of Texas about every 2 to 6 weeks. They were sending us another bundle, nice thick package of certified mail. And I guarantee you, it is disconcerting. You're being sued again. I mean, the money, it gets your attention, and you get another package in the mail, and you're sitting there saying, oh my God. And we were getting it every 2 to 6 weeks. And we drafted the freedom of religion, and we sent it in to them, and they went dead silent for 5 minutes. Yeah. And they came back, and we had a hearing with Judge John K. Dietz. He took over the case. He's the chief administrative judge for Travis County, which is the seat of government here in Texas. And Mr. Dietz is a brilliant man. He has a birth defect, spina bifida, I assume, but his back is not right. And I suspect, based on that, he spent his life in books. And I guarantee you that man was brilliant. He understood law. He understood history. I mean, he was articulate and fluent, and I really liked the guy. Although he initially he took over the case. And first thing he did was try to scare us. And I thought, oh God, I'm going to jail. But that's what I thought, but it didn't happen. And then he said, we're going to do something we've never done, I've virtually never done before. I'm going to invite you to come back into my chambers and see if we can settle this case. We said, yeah, sure. Went back into chambers and started 5 months of settlement negotiations. Now, we weren't there all the time. We only met 3 or 4 times over the course of the 5 months. I don't remember how many times. But the assistant attorney general in the case, Raul Noriega, he was the guy in charge of the case, he told us he'd never seen a judge work so hard to try to settle a case. And the reason is because Judge Dietz understood the implications of this case. I don't believe Raul Noriega ever grasped the implications. I don't think he really understood what was going on, but Judge Dietz did. And the implications are enormous, because we had identified something. And incidentally, we looked back, we found in the course of our research, we looked at 5 other states, and all of them had definitions of drugs that included the phrase man or other animals. I presume the same is true for every state in the Union. I assume they all do. The federal government absolutely does. I think all the states do. Now, we also traced it backwards, and the earliest instance we can find is the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act. And you can find in Section 6 of the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, you can look for the definition of food, and you can look for the definition of drugs. And they both define them in terms of man or other animals. Which means that our government has been working to designate all of us as animals. And they've been doing it for over a century. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the first one to read the law and realize what it meant spiritually. I understood an average person read it, and there's a man or other animals. Pay no attention. In fact, those of you who are educated in the theory of evolution, you find nothing remarkable calling man an animal. Right? But if you're an animal, you have no claim. You are not a man made in God's image. If you're not a man made in God's image, you have no business going to a Christian church. You have no business going to a Jewish synagogue or a Muslim, I assume Muslim, again, I haven't studied it, but I can't even think of the right word for Muslim, but Muslim church, for lack of a better term. You got no business going there. This ultimately is evidence of spiritual warfare, and it's because the government understands that if you people get hold of the idea that you are men and women made in God's image and you are not animals, guess what? You're not subject to the war on drugs. There are people in this room who have probably spent time in the slammer because they have been charged with the possession of a controlled substance. And if anyone had been able to read the law and read the definitions and come up and say, sorry, Judge, I, under the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States and under Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution of Texas, which also guarantees my freedom of religion, you cannot treat me as an animal. Under the Ninth Amendment to the Constitution, which says the enumeration of certain rights in this Constitution, I'm going to paraphrase, I can't remember it precisely, shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. It means just because the Constitution names 10 rights or 20 rights, it doesn't mean that there aren't 50 or 100. And we've got a Declaration of Independence that declares us to be endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. That Ninth Amendment opens the door, takes us right back to those God-given rights. And if you can grab hold of those rights, you're not subject to the war on drugs. How many people have been jailed, imprisoned, had their lives trashed and destroyed just because nobody has read the damn law and realized what it meant? We got a war on drugs that's based on the man or other animals. 4 words, man or other animals. Nobody's read it and understood what it means. The drug war is based on those 4 words. The drug war laid the foundation for much of the modern police state. I'm going to make you bet that half of what police do today is involved with drug-related crimes. I know that 70% of the people in federal penitentiaries are there on drug-related crimes. We've got a little 4 words, all right, down here at the bottom of this inverted pyramid. And on those 4 words, we have the war on drugs. And the war on drugs gave us much of the modern police state. And the police state gave us the prison industrial complex where we jail more people per capita in this country than any other nation on the face of the earth. And it's all done on the basis that you folks are nothing but livestock. And if you can catch hold of these ideas and you read the law and you look in the Bible and you plug it in relative to the First Amendment of the Constitution, all of a sudden you can walk away. All of this can collapse. We're talking about millions of tons of concrete and steel that were used to build all these damn prisons. And they're all built on 4 little words, man or other animals. And it gets deeper than that. Everything that happens in major pharmaceutical industry right now is based on the presumption that you are all livestock. In this case, we found the term drugs and also the term medical devices. Medical devices also include the phrase man or other animals. And these are government definitions. These aren't my definitions. These aren't paraphrased. That's what they say. That means, how much American medicine do you suppose there is that doesn't include either drugs or medical devices? There is none. The whole American Medical Association, the whole medical industry is based on the presumption that you are all nothing but livestock. Trying to think what else is involved, but that's quite a lot right there. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars in profits. And it's all in violation of the fundamental principle this country started on, the extraordinary and radical proposition that you are all endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. And we have forgotten it. I've been to a 4th of July ceremony virtually every year of my life. I assume my mom probably took me to one when I was a year old, maybe even less than a year old. I don't remember it, but I was there. I've been to one 4th of July ceremony in my entire life where anyone even read the Declaration of Independence. And yet, what are we celebrating every 4th of July? That's the single biggest purely American holiday we have. 4th of July. The only thing that's bigger is Christmas, and that's international. That's not just American. What are we celebrating? You ask the average person, you get Jay Leno and his Jay Leno All-Star Streetwalkers or whatever they are. I don't remember what he calls them, but you know what I'm talking about. Jaywalkers, all right. Streetwalkers, jaywalkers, I don't know. You get out there and ask them, what are we celebrating on the 4th of July? And they'll tell you, oh, that's when we won the American Revolution, or that was a big battle in the American Revolution, or that was when we won the Civil War, or what is it? They don't know what it is. What we are celebrating are the ideas that are enshrined in that document. And those ideas are first and foremost that we are all made in God's image, and secondly, we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and thirdly, the fundamental purpose of government is to secure your God-given unalienable rights. This goes exactly to what Pastor Broden was talking about. And he's talking about the spiritual warfare. He's talking about how the government, the war between the system, the government, and the Christian faith, and even the Jewish faith insofar as they understand what's going on. This is why they want you away. It is your faith that's most important and most powerful. If you can grab hold of it, you can walk right out from fines of $25,000 a day, and that's what ultimately happened. We advanced that argument. Again, we went to the court. Mr. Dietz, Judge Dietz took over the case, tried to settle for 5 months. At one point, he looked at us and he said, he tried to explain, and he had a degree, he had a master's in psychology before he went to law school. I mean, this is a very brilliant man. And he explains to us, he says, nobody ever likes to settle a case out of court. Nobody likes to settle because you got to give something up that you want. You got to compromise. And he says, everybody hates it. But he says, we do it nevertheless because you're afraid that if you don't settle, something worse will happen. Okay? If I don't agree to a settlement, something worse will happen. And he looked at me and Ben Taylor, and we were sitting there, and we didn't have lawyers, you understand. And again, they'd spent $160,000 on one of the best law firms in Texas, and they got nowhere. We're in there just pro se by ourselves. And he looked at us, and his eyes went kind of wide. It was as if we had just stepped out of a UFO, and we had the antenna on our head or whatever. And he looked at us, and he said, but you guys aren't afraid. He says, I don't see how we're going to get a settlement on this case. Yeah, well, we were afraid a little bit, all right? But we knew the good Lord was there the whole time. We had Assistant Attorney General Raul Noriega. He told us at one point, he says, I've been Assistant Attorney General for 22 years, and in fact, he had a Mercedes-Benz. The state provided him with a Mercedes-Benz. They couldn't buy him a Ford, you understand? They had to get him a Mercedes-Benz to drive around in. Company car from the state. Gee, I thought that was generous. He'd been here 22 years. He said, I have never had one of my motion hearings defeated in court. He went into court for 22 years. He made a motion to the judge, and the judge said, yeah, buddy, whatever you want. He says, he said, you guys have stopped me in 9 consecutive hearings, and I have no idea how you've done it. All right? And it wasn't because we were smart. It wasn't because we were clever. It was because things happened. I mean, the good Lord stopped it. We had one hearing we were scheduled to go into, and they had 3 judges taken out that day with medical emergencies. One had a heart attack, one had emergency oral surgery, and one had a third emergency, and I don't remember. But events like this took time and time and time, and the reason it happened is because the good Lord was buying us time. It'd give us another 4 to 6 weeks before they could reschedule the hearing. And he bought us time to where we could get up to speed on this thing. They could have crushed us like a tin can early on. But the good Lord was buying us time. And Raul Noriega, he didn't understand it, but we did. We were walking around, Ben was, had a little container like this. Virgin olive oil, been prayed over. All right, by his Bible study class down in Utopia, Texas. I prayed over, and he walked around the courthouse every time we went to court, and he anointed all 4 corners of the courthouse. All right? And if the judge wasn't there, if we got into chambers and the judge wasn't there, Ben would get up and put a couple drops of olive oil on the judge's chair. And things happened. Judges recused themselves. Judges got the heck out of the case, and in the final analysis, They brought us back for, after 5 months of trying to negotiate a settlement, they finally said, you guys aren't going to settle. And we weren't. And they had 2 more hearings on jurisdiction, and that was in 2007, and we haven't heard another word from them since. They had invested, thank you, they had invested 5 years. No, 6 years. They'd invested 6 years in this case and $500,000 in pretrial hearings and pretrial investigation. And they let it all go. The whole system, if we had gone to court, and no matter how this went, if we had to appeal it, somebody's going to have to admit that we are not animals. And if they do that, the war on drugs dies, the police state is badly disabled, the prison industrial complex becomes a ghost town. All right? This is available, this information is available for any of you who want to look, want to read, want to study. This isn't just my opinion. This has happened, it's worked, God works. There's something to be done, and where it comes down to is you get an opportunity to choose this day whether you are going to be animals under the theory of evolution. That's what they teach you in school, and it's not an accident. This is evidence of spiritual warfare, or if you're going to be man, made in God's image, and endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. If you can grab onto that second, if you choose that, if you want to make it your choice, you have an opportunity to get out. You have an opportunity to resist much of what passes for a police state today. I'm Alfred Adask. I want to thank all of you for listening. Thanks very much.
Okay. Any one of you who may have a question for Alfred, you're welcome to come to the microphone. Come to the microphone, and you can line up behind me here, and we can make and you can make your question made known to him. All right.
All right, this is more a statement than a question, but you introduced Islam into the Judeo-Christian presentation that you did anyway. But I'll subject to you that under Islam and under Sharia, an infidel, anyone that is not Muslim, is a second-class citizen and basically an animal.
I agree with you.
So
the Jews did the same thing. They called the people that were not Hebrews, they called them Goy. They referred to them as animals. This is a fundamental tendency in people all along. I mean, everybody looks at somebody else, and if you want to get them, first thing you do is you declare them to be animals.
yeah, but you can't compare Islam to Christianity is my point.
Well, my point is they all three trace to the same patriarch, Abraham. I'm guessing, I'm not a student of the Muslim faith, but I'm guessing that their Genesis, all right, they probably have a verse that's comparable to our Genesis. I'm going to guess that they also start with the idea that they're men made in God's image, and if they do, then that's the similarity I'm talking about.
Well,
Then you go from there.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Al. Nothing great or fancy. I just want to know if you'll share that PowerPoint with us.
Yeah, absolutely. One way or another, we're going to get this thing up on the internet here in the next little while. It's the first time I've ever done a PowerPoint presentation, and I just
Well, it
don't
looked
have
good.
the
It looked
coordination
good.
to
It
do it.
looked
That's what comes down.
well-organized, and
We're going to get it up there. We'll get it up there probably in the next week or 10 days, depending on how things go.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ralph? Oh, yeah, if you're interested, you can take, if you want to follow this information more closely, I have a blog at Adask, adask.wordpress.com. And all of this information is up there. There's a bunch of other things besides that, but if you went to the blog and you looked at the top the category, it's man or other animals. There are categories on the right-hand side. Look for man or other animals. Click on it. It'll take you to about 10 different articles that I've written on man or other animals, including the original paperwork that we submitted to the Attorney General that ultimately stopped them. And again, this is the grace of God. This is the sort of thing where you look at it, and the good Lord sometimes lets you see. I don't see everything, and I don't see clearly, and I don't see perfectly, but sometimes good Lord lets you see. Stuart.
Yes, sir. I was there court watching.
Yeah.
And one thing that was really powerful also was Ben Taylor would stand up before the judge and say, I don't, how did he put it, this Freemason temple, I don't
remember clearly, but it was another spiritual. I mean, we went at them. We beat these guys
It was
with
constant-
faith.
yeah,
We
constant
beat these guys
spiritual
with faith. And one of the stories, I didn't get to it, but one of the proudest moments in my life, when Judge Dietz looked at us and he said, talking about a settlement, and he said, but you guys aren't afraid. That was one of the proudest moments of my life because Revelation 21:8 provides a laundry list of people who are destined for damnation. And it includes the killer, the murderers, and the liars, and the whoremongers, and the sorcerers, and what you might expect. But top of the list is the fearful. Your fear is inversely proportional to your faith, and when a man as brilliant as Judge Dietz says, I can't see any fear in you, believe me, there was some. Now, and my fear is not, my faith is not perfect, but there was some. There was a little anxiety. But that was a very proud moment for me. You get hold of that faith and you hang on tight, and it can take care of you. Yeah. Pastor Broden, thank you.
All right, thank you, Alfred. Certainly a perspective, that I had no idea that the federal government was calling us animals. They certainly are trying to treat us like animals. But what a powerful observation that obviously that has implications within the legal system. And we do have a judge here, and he didn't ask a question. I was seeing if David was going to stand up. We have David Evans, who is running for place 2 in the district court 5. Court of Appeal 5, yeah.